Engaging with stablecoin yields represents the opposite mindset: deliberate, informed capital allocation based on transparent risk assessment and clear reward structures. This transition requires recognizing that cash itself has become an active investment decision. The choice between a 0.1% bank account and a 5% decentralized protocol represents perhaps the most significant financial decision most people make, yet traditional finance frames the former as safe and the latter as risky. This framing deliberately obscures the very real risk of guaranteed purchasing power erosion in traditional accounts. By contrast, stablecoin yield strategies explicitly acknowledge and manage risks, from protocol smart contract vulnerabilities to liquidity constraints, through diversification, independent ratings analysis, and careful platform selection. The practical implementation pathway, the journey from traditional savings to stablecoin yield generation, follows a deliberate three-stage pathway that transforms apprehension into confidence. Stage 1. Safety foundation begins with education on stablecoin ratings from independent providers like bluechip.org. Just as Morningstar revolutionized mutual fund analysis with transparent ratings, these services demystify which digital assets maintain proper reserves and operational integrity. This step replaces blind institutional trust with verifiable metrics. Stage 2. Strategic diversification moves beyond the which coin question to systematic allocation across 4-6 quality stablecoins distributed across multiple protocols and blockchain ecosystems. This mirrors sophisticated institutional portfolio construction, but applies it to digital cash management full. The 5-7% yield range emerges as the strategic sweet spot, substantially outperforming traditional options while avoiding the extreme risk profiles of double-digit protocols. Stage 3. Continuous optimization introduces tools and monitoring systems that transform static deposits into actively managed capital. From automated vault optimizers that rebalance between protocols to emerging AI agents that constantly seek yield opportunities, this stage represents financial management's digital future. Critically, every strategy maintains the non-negotiable requirement of liquidity. The ability to withdraw funds within 24 hours distinguishes capital allocation from capital lockup. Redefining modern cash management, the ultimate significance of stablecoin yield strategies transcends percentage points and commodities care. We're witnessing the early stages of a fundamental redefinition of what constitutes responsible cash management in a digital age. The old paradigm equated safety with familiar institutions regardless of outcomes. The new paradigm equates safety with verifiable security, transparent operations, and appropriate compensation for risk. This transition parallels historical shifts in financial consciousness, from hoarding physical currency to embracing bank deposits, from accepting passbook savings to demanding money market rates. Each expansion of financial literacy seemed radical until it became commonplace. Today's yield differential between traditional and decentralized systems represents not an anomaly, but an arbitrage opportunity created by technological disruption. As with all such opportunities, it won't last forever as adoption increases and efficiencies normalize. What remains permanent is the empowerment principle. Individuals deserve transparent alternatives when existing systems fail to serve their interests. Stablecoin yields offer more than improved returns. They represent the democratization of institutional-grade financial tools and the reclamation of agency over our financial future. In this context, moving funds from 0.1% to 5% isn't merely financially prudent. This framework doesn't suggest abandoning traditional finance entirely, but rather advocates for a proportional reallocation based on transparent risk-reward analysis. The stablecoin yield opportunity represents perhaps the most accessible entry point to decentralized finance's broader promise, a system where financial tools serve people rather than institutions, where transparency replaces opacity, and where our money works as hard as we do. The most dangerous misconception in decentralized finance is that higher percentage returns directly correlate with smarter investing. This flawed mental model leads countless investors to chase double-digit APY without understanding what those numbers truly represent. My methodology reframes yield generation not as speculative gambling, but as precision engineering of risk-adjusted returns. The distinction is critical. Gamblers focus exclusively on potential rewards while ignoring underlying mechanics. Engineers analyze stress points, failure probabilities, and systemic dependencies before committing capital. This engineering mindset begins with a fundamental principle. All yield represents compensation for risk. The crucial question isn't how much yield, but what specific risks am I being paid to assume? A 5% return might compensate for smart contract vulnerability risk on a new protocol. A 12% return might compensate for liquidity lockup risk and speculative token exposure. My framework categorizes these risks into 3 distinct tiers, each requiring different management approaches and appropriate portfolio allocations. The 3-tiered risk architecture: Tier 1, foundation assets, 5-7% AP range. This tier forms the core, typically 60-80% of stablecoin allocations. These yields come from protocols with established histories, substantial liquidity, and integrations with blue-chip stablecoins rated A or B+ on independent rating platforms. The risks here primarily involve smart contract execution, mitigated by time-tested code audits, and temporary liquidity crunches, mitigated by minimum vault sizes exceeding $100. This isn't settling for modest returns. It's strategically capturing the efficiency premium of decentralized lending over traditional banking while accepting only the most measurable, manageable risks. The psychological shift occurs when we recognize that moving from 0.1% to 5% represents a 500x improvement in yield, an extraordinary achievement, rather than focusing on why we're not getting 15%. Tier 2, strategic satellites, 7-12% of pi range, comprising 15-30% of allocations. This tier involves calculated exposures to emerging protocols, newer stablecoins with solid fundamentals, or specialized strategies like cross-chain yield opportunities. The additional 2-5% yield over foundation assets compensates for less operational history, smaller development teams, or more complex reward mechanisms. Each position here requires specific risk isolation strategies, perhaps allocating only to protocols with insured vaults, or pairing exposure with hedging positions on more established platforms. This tier operates on the venture principle, multiple small, diversified positions where the failure of any single element doesn't threaten the overall structure. Tier 3, experimental options, 12% plus a PA range, limited to 5-10% of total allocations. This tier acknowledges that some investors possess the risk tolerance and monitoring capacity for high volatility opportunities. These might involve liquidity provisioning with impermanent loss risks, strategies involving protocol reward tokens, or emerging blockchain ecosystems. The critical discipline here is explicit boundary setting, both in capital allocation and in predefined exit conditions. These positions should never graduate to larger allocations simply because they've performed well. Their structural risk profiles remain unchanged by temporary outcomes. The non-negotiable safety protocols beyond percentage allocations. My methodology establishes inviolable rules that function like a financial immune system. Liquidity as oxygen protocol: any protocol requiring more than 24 hours for withdrawals receives automatic disqualification regardless of yield. Promised, this rule addresses the most common failure mode in DeFi: exit liquidity, evaporation during market stress. The 24-hour standard isn't arbitrary. It represents the maximum reasonable time frame for reallocation during normal market conditions, while preventing capital lockup during crises. This protocol extends to evaluating withdrawal fees. Excessive costs create the same functional limitation as time delays. The multi-chain firewall system diversification across blockchain ecosystems, Ethereum, Solana, Sui, Avalanche, etc., represents more than yield optimization. It creates systemic risk compartmentalization. When one network experiences congestion, fee spikes, or technical issues, the entire portfolio doesn't suffer paralysis. This approach mirrors traditional portfolio theories, geographic diversification, but applied to technological infrastructure. Each blockchain ecosystem functions as a separate zone with its own risk characteristics and failure modes. Fault curator longevity requirement protocols managed by anonymous teams or developers without proven crisis experience receive automatic exclusion. The 2022-2023 market downturn provided the equivalent of financial stress tests. Protocols that survived with transparent communication and responsible fund management demonstrate the operational resilience I require. This preference for battle-tested teams over anonymous code represents a philosophical choice. Trust in people's proven judgment, not just in mathematics of smart contracts. The leverage prohibition clause, despite sophisticated offerings of leveraged yield strategies, my methodology maintains absolute prohibition against borrowed capital in stablecoin yield generation. This eliminates liquidation risk, the fastest path to total capital loss, while maintaining psychological clarity during market volatility. The discipline resides in recognizing that leverage transforms yield generation from a capital deployment activity to a market timing gamble, fundamentally altering the risk profile beyond acceptable parameters. The due diligence framework in action practical implementation follows a consistent investigative pattern before any capital deployment. Asset verification phase begins not with the protocol, but with the stablecoin itself. Independent rating platforms like Bluechip Org provide the equivalent of a foundation soil test before construction. A stablecoin's rating reflects reserve transparency, issuer credibility, and redemption history, factors more fundamental than any protocol's features. Protocol autopsy phase examines historical performance across multiple market conditions. Tools like DeFi Llama provide transparent analytics on total value locked trends, revenue generation, and token holder concentration. The critical analysis focuses not on absolute numbers but on behavior during stress periods. How did TVL, yields, and liquidity change during the last major market downturn? Withdrawal pathway mapping traces the complete journey from deposit to accessible funds. This includes not only the primary withdrawal, but any required bridging between chains, token conversions, and exchange transfers back to traditional currency if needed. Each step represents potential friction or failure points. The entire pathway must maintain integrity under stress conditions. Contingency pre-planning establishes specific trigger conditions for exit before entering any position. These might include specific changes in protocol governance, deviations from stated treasury management policies, or declines in key liquidity metrics. The discipline lies in writing these conditions when judgment is unclouded by emotional attachment to positions. The psychological infrastructure beyond analytical frameworks lies the less discussed but equally critical psychological architecture. The detachment discipline involves scheduled portfolio reviews rather than constant monitoring. Successful yield generation resembles farming more than trading. Constant checking doesn't improve outcomes but increases emotional reactivity. Establishing specific weekly or bi-weekly review periods creates necessary distance from market noise. The narrative resistance practice recognizes that the DeFi space generates compelling stories around new protocols. My methodology implements a mandatory cooling-off period between discovering an opportunity and allocating capital, specifically to allow narrative excitement to dissipate in favor of analytical evaluation. The failure expectation framework acknowledges that some positions will underperform or fail entirely. By psychologically and financially preparing for this inevitability through strict percentage allocations and diversification, We prevent the panic reactions that transform manageable losses into catastrophic ones. The evolving toolkit, the final component, acknowledges that risk management tools constantly evolve. Automated monitoring systems like slush wallets, vault tracking represent the first generation of intelligent oversight tools that provide alert-based monitoring rather than requiring manual checking. Emerging insurance protocols offer increasingly sophisticated coverage options for smart contract failure, though careful evaluation of insurer solvency remains essential. Decentralized credit rating systems now provide on-chain reputation scoring for protocols based on historical behavior, a promising development toward more transparent risk assessment. This architectural approach transforms yield generation from a series of disconnected bets into a cohesive financial structure with intentional, load-bearing elements, calculated experimental zones, and multiple safety systems. The 5-7% foundation yield isn't a compromise, but the engineered result of deliberate risk calibration. The occasional foray into seasoned greed but calculated exploration within strictly defined boundaries. What emerges isn't merely a collection of profitable positions, but a resilient system designed to generate consistent returns while surviving the inevitable storms that wash away less disciplined approaches. This architectural mindset represents the essential difference between those who occasionally capture high yields and those who consistently build sustainable wealth through decentralized finance. The former operates on hope and opportunism. The latter builds with the disciplined precision of an engineer who knows that financial structures, like physical ones, must withstand predictable stresses and unpredictable storms alike. The fundamental inefficiency in today's yield generation landscape isn't capital allocation, it's cognitive allocation. Individual investors spend disproportionate mental energy monitoring rates, rebalancing positions, and tracking emerging protocols. This manual approach creates two critical limitations. Human attention bandwidth restricts how many opportunities we can effectively evaluate, and emotional biases interfere with systematic reallocation decisions. The emergence of AI-powered yield optimization agents addresses both constraints simultaneously, transforming yield generation from an active management task to a supervised autonomy model. Platforms like Virtual's Butler AI and the Base App's Banker Momo agents represent the first generation of this transition. Their architecture follows a principal agent framework with enhanced transparency. We define parameters, risk tolerance, preferred blockchain ecosystems, minimum liquidity requirements, while AI agents continuously scan thousands of data points across protocols. This isn't merely automation of existing tasks, but capability augmentation. These systems process cross-chain liquidity data, protocol revenue trends, and governance proposal implications in real time, identifying opportunities no individual could reasonably track. The transition mirrors the evolution of equity investing from stock picking to algorithmically managed portfolios, but compressed into months rather than decades. The three-layer AI architecture. Layer 1. Discovery agents function as specialized financial radar, scanning for anomalous yield opportunities across fragmented DeFi landscape. Unlike human researchers limited by language and community access, these agents parse smart contract data directly, identifying newly launched protocols, detecting changes in reward structures, and spotting emerging liquidity pool opportunities. Their most valuable function lies in correlation detection, recognizing that a yield spike on one protocol might indicate imminent opportunities on another due to shared underlying mechanisms or arbitrage relationships. Layer 2. Execution agents handle the mechanical complexities that consume disproportionate human effort, calculating optimal gas fee timing for transactions, managing cross-chain bridging operations, and navigating increasingly complex reward claiming processes. These agents operate on predictive cost optimization, analyzing historical gas fee patterns to execute transactions during low fee periods, or batching multiple operations into single transactions. This layer transforms yield generation from a series of discrete manual operations into a continuous, optimized process. Layer 3. Risk intelligence agents provide the crucial oversight that prevents automation from becoming vulnerability. These systems monitor for security red flags, anomalous smart contract interactions, changes in protocol admin keys, or unusual withdrawal patterns that might precede exploit. They function as automated compliance officers, ensuring positions remain within predefined risk parameters and triggering automatic exits when those boundaries are breached. This layer addresses the legitimate concern that AI optimization might increase exposure to protocol failures. Instead, it creates more consistent and comprehensive risk monitoring than intermittent human checking. The Ripple Catalyst, banking's regulatory transformation parallel to technological evolution, runs regulatory transformation with Ripple's pursuit of a national trust bank charter representing the most significant potential catalyst for institutional adoption. This development isn't merely about one company's expansion, but about regulatory pathway creation for blockchain-native institutions. Should Ripple secure this charter, it establishes precedent that organizations operating with digital assets at their core can meet stringent banking requirements, effectively bridging the perceived gap between crypto and regulated finance. The implications extend beyond Ripple itself. Traditional and neobanks observing this regulatory validation face increased competitive pressure to develop their own yield products for digital assets. This creates a virtuous adoption cycle. As more institutions enter the space, they bring additional liquidity, improved infrastructure, and enhanced security standards. Ripple's hinted on-chain yield products for XRPs and Arlusdi specifically could demonstrate how regulated entities can offer competitive returns while maintaining compliance, potentially creating hybrid models that combine decentralized finance's efficiency with traditional finance's oversight frameworks. The coming institutional on-chain complex, these converging trends, AI optimization and regulatory validation, point toward a near-future landscape I term the institutional on-chain complex. This hybrid ecosystem features algorithmic market making at scale, where institutional capital deployed through AI systems creates deeper, more stable liquidity pools than currently exist in predominantly retail-driven DeFi. This doesn't eliminate opportunities for individual participants, but rather creates more predictable yield environments with reduced volatility and manipulated farm and dump scheme. Compliance-integrated protocols that build regulatory requirements directly into smart contract logic, automatic transaction reporting, investor accreditation, verification, or geographic restriction enforcement. While some decentralization purists may resist these developments, they represent the necessary maturation infrastructure for trillion-dollar capital inflows, cross-protocol aggregation layers that will emerge as intermediaries between complex DeFi ecosystems and institutional risk committees. These won't be centralized exchanges, but rather transparent aggregation protocols that allocate capital across multiple underlying platforms while providing unified reporting, risk metrics, and compliance documentation, essentially creating the operating system for institutional DeFi participation. The individual investor's evolving role. This transformation doesn't render individual participation obsolete, but rather redefines the required skill set. From rate comparison to parameter engineering, the future skill isn't identifying which protocol currently offers 8% versus 7.5%, but rather defining the precise risk parameters and optimization goals for AI agents. This resembles the difference between manually trading stocks versus designing a quantitative investment strategy. The value migrates from execution to architecture. From protocol monitoring to agent evaluation, as AI yield agents proliferate, a new evaluation discipline emerges, assessing agent performance history, transparency of decision logic, and security architecture. Investors will compare not just yield percentages, but agent track records across varying market conditions, creating a new category of financial product assessment. From silos to strategic integration, the most sophisticated individual strategies will involve layered approaches. Core foundation allocations in blue-chip protocols, satellite positions managed by specialized AI agents, and experimental allocations to emerging AI-DeFi intersections. This creates a portfolio of intelligent systems rather than just a portfolio of assets. The temporary arbitrage window, the current period, represents a unique historical arbitrage opportunity. AI optimization tools are already accessible to retail investors while institutional capital remains largely sidelined, awaiting regulatory clarity. This creates a knowledge-technology gap where technically competent individuals can achieve optimization levels approaching institutional sophistication, but without competing against institutional capital volumes. This window will inevitably close as institutions enter in force, but the closure won't eliminate opportunity. It will transform the nature of competitive advantage. Future success will depend less on discovering unknown protocols and more on designing superior optimization strategies that can be encoded into AI agents. The democratizing promise isn't equal outcomes, but equal access to the tools that create advantages. Preparing for the autonomous future. Practical preparation for this transition involves technical familiarity acquisition through hands-on experimentation with existing AI agents, even with minimal capital. Understanding their interfaces, parameter settings, and reporting outputs builds essential intuition. Protocol literacy development focused not on surface-level yields but on underlying mechanisms. As agents handle execution, human understanding must deepen to effectively guide and evaluate those agents. Security posture evolution, recognizing that AI systems introduce new attack vectors while mitigating others. The future requires understanding agent wallet architectures, authorization models, and emergency override procedures. Is clear. Yield generation is evolving from an activity requiring constant human attention to a design system requiring periodic human oversight. The most successful participants will be those who recognize this transition early and develop the hybrid skills needed: part financial architect designing systems, part technologist understanding capabilities, and part strategist anticipating regulatory and competitive shifts. This intelligence revolution ultimately delivers on blockchain's original promise, removing intermediaries not just from transactions but from financial decision-making itself. We're approaching a world where sophisticated capital allocation isn't reserved for institutions with teams of analysts, but is accessible to anyone who can clearly define their financial objectives and risk tolerance. The agents handle the complexity. We reclaim our cognitive capacity for higher-order strategy and life beyond constant portfolio monitoring. This represents perhaps the most profound transformation of all: the democratization not just of financial access, but of financial intelligence itself. This progression doesn't represent the elimination of human judgment, but rather its elevation from tactical execution to strategic design, the most profound upgrade in the history of personal finance.